abductions. But
the Betty and Barney Hill story is very interesting, but there's no real evidence other than their testimony. Is that correct?
Well, there was a stain on Betty's dress. There's her excellent recall. He was unconscious.
What was the stain on her dress that's so interesting to me?
It was a fluid that they used in the testing, that some kind of a fluid,
the
a chemical.
alien testing?
That they did when they drew ova from her and they drew sperm from him. Now, so there's a book out called Contact by Stanton Friedman.
I read that.
Kathleen, I'd love to know where the car is. Where the Chevy they were driving.
Oh, it disappeared?
Where is that? I don't know. I'd have to ask Kathleen where it is. Did it end up in a junkyard? Because there were marks on the back of the car as well. There were trace evidence in the back of the car. You know, Ted Phillips he goes around the world collecting trace evidence and radioactive signatures from sightings and landings. On the back of the car, there was a couple of marks, but it was Betty's. It's their credibility. Why would they want to bring this into their lives? And she was conscious, semi-conscious through much of it, and Barney was not conscious. He was unconscious. If you hear the tapes of Ben Simon's interviews with them under hypnosis, the screaming and he was just so frightened. Yeah. And the Zeta Reticuli map, when the being Betty looked at the map and the being showed her a map as she was on her way out the door, and she said, "May I take this?" And the being was going to give it to her, but then another one zipped up and said, "No. You can't have this."
Zeta Reticuli is exactly the same place where Bob Lazar says they found those with the spaceships that they have at Area or S4.
Well, the Little Greys, Zeta Reticuli, Barney and Betty's abduction. You had Marjorie Fish, an amateur astronomer. She took the memory of Betty's. Betty drew up the star map, and she did a three-dimensional scale model of that part of the universe, and was able to identify Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 and accepted by astronomers. So that map that Betty saw aboard that ship had not been seen on Earth before.
And Betty has no history of astronomy or no studying it?
No, none of it at all. And you know, interesting things like when they got back to the house, the house was open and the keys to the house were on the table with leaves so that they might have dropped them at the site and the beings returned them. Now, you know who Bud Hopkins was?
Yes.
He said that since he studied the Linda Cortile case, where the woman was floated out of her apartment building over the East River, and Orange Orb picked her up, plunged into the river.
He was the guy.
Bud was an artist. He was a graphic artist. He was a designer, a painter, and a lovely man. And he was one of the first people to start to deal with the trauma of abductees. He got a reputation for being able to interview them, hypnotize them, interview them, and get their stories and empathize and sympathize with them. And he said that in some cases that he studied, the beings would grab a man from somewhere in America and grab a woman and out of their cars, out of their clothes, put them up, test them, draw ova, draw sperm, fluids, whatever they were doing. And then the woman would wake up in the man's shoes or a different car, or almost as if the beings were finished with them. I don't care where they go now. Yeah, put them back, you know, that kind of thing. He said that was the oddest phenomena.
Like releasing a trout.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I think that's catch a trout, you catch a big rainbow trout and you're fly fishing and you got a barbless hook. You know, most people, if you go to Montana, go to the Gallatin River, shout out to the Gallatin.
Beautiful.
Gorgeous place. People catch and release because they appreciate that the trout are there. They'd rather go buy halibut from a store and not eat the fish because they want the salmon to be healthy. They want the trout to be healthy.
Well,
so they catch them. And then they release them. But if you're a brown trout, well, brown trout are invasive. But if you're a rainbow trout, and someone catches you, and you know they take you on some 200-yard run down this river as they're trying to draw you in. It's a big 9-pound rainbow, catch of a lifetime,
Beautiful
right?
time.
And some guy pulls it on, it takes pictures of it, like shows it, and then releases it. And then this thing's like, how the fuck did I get here? What am I doing outside of my universe?
Yeah.
What am I doing in this other dimension of air where I can't breathe?
Precisely. Yeah, and that's catch and release.
Catch and release with people.
Travis Walton says, you know, you got to think of them as just people from over there. They're just
he's the guy the
there.
Fire in the Sky movie was based on.
Yeah,
he's got another interesting story. Here's what I want people
credibility
to think.
there, and credibility with Barney and Betty. I just don't think they're lying, and I don't think the Ariel school children are lying.
I don't want to think they're lying. This is the problem that I have with it. I want to believe them. But this is what I want people to consider, because most people that are pragmatic, reasonable people that don't want to be ridiculed, they look at these stories and they go, oh, come on, people are full of shit. And I've been there too. But I want people to imagine that if aliens did occasionally visit Earth, how often do you think this would take place? And how it would be very infrequently. And if it was happening, these would be completely unique, unusual occurrences out of nowhere where someone would come down, they would do something, and they would be leaving the person with this thought and this memory and this inability to describe it with normal words. If you were taken aboard a spaceship and you were some reptilian beings that were 3 feet tall were running experiments on you and you were paralyzed, and then they released you back on Earth, what words do you have available to you to describe this experience in a way that, like, if you tell me, hey, Joe, I went whitewater rafting with my kids. It was a great time. It was so fun. We got to see eagles, and it was gorgeous. And then we had lunch at this beautiful little cafe. What a great day. I can envision this experience. I can see it. But if you tell me, hey, man, we went camping, and I woke up, and some alien had a finger in my ass.
The Allagash incident, they went camping, and they disappeared.
Quite a few of those, right?
There's hundreds of thousands. And here, I brought you a book. This is Bruce Maccabee's book. It's all the headlines from 1952, 432 reports given. And I'll address your specific question about people, how they relate their experiences and how genuine they feel in a second here. 432 reports given the Air Force in 1952 on aerial sightings, ships from other planet. We've got memos from the government here. Former Army pilot sees flying saucer by daylight, whatever was cited here. July 30 stories, fighter pilots at Newcastle say alert for more saucer reports. These are newspaper.
Yeah.
That's yours.
Well, newspapers never lie.
Well,
I don't know if you know that.
Well,
they never make fake stories.
Well,
they never talk shit about people.
The New York Times is pretty reliable. Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Keene are reporters for the New York Times, and they've been studying this phenomenon. They report very credibly on it. I'll tell you how an abductee's experience is related. I attended a lecture at the Fifth Avenue Medical Institute in Manhattan with my wife a few years ago. That would be about 15 years ago. And John Mack was the lecturer. You know, he wrote the book Abduction. He was the Harvard psychiatrist who wrote Abduction. You can get that up too, Abduction, John Mack.
Yes, I read that as well.
Yeah. And
that freaked a friend of mine out. She was a very pragmatic, non-UFO believing person. And we were working together on news radio, my friend Maura Tierney. And she came up to me and she goes like, this book is freaking me the fuck out. And he wrote a second book as well. Didn't he die in a car accident?
John Mack,
I believe he died in a car accident.
Stepped off a curb in a small town in England, and he was struck by a car.
Yeah.
And 3 other John Macks died the same day in England. So
you think people were whacking John Macks because he knew too much?
I don't know.
Let's take them all out.
I was at this lecture,